Welcome to Coming Out and Beyond. This is a show about LGBTQIA stories. I am your host, Anne-Marie Zanzel, and I am a late bloomer to the queer world, and I work with people coming out later in life. I provide both coaching and mutual support groups. I have many different labels, including, but not limited to, queer, lesbian, mom, daughter, sister, friend, minister, and fiance to my lovely partner, photographer Tanda McKay. I passionately believe in the power of storytelling to change the world. In the telling of our stories, we often can help another person to hear their own. Today, my guest is Anna Empey, who lives in Washington State with her wife, Caitlin. Anna grew up in a 2,000-acre apple and fruit orchard in eastern Washington. While growing up, she went to the farmer's market selling her family fruit until she left to go to college. She graduated with her degree from Brigham Young University in Anthropology with a minor in communications. Anna came out to her Mormon family when she was 25, and her wife just celebrated 3 years of marriage. Anna loves supporting small businesses and has created a business to help others, and she has also spent countless hours volunteering for a variety of LGBTQ organizations. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, Anne-Marie. How are you doing?
I'm good. So, Anna Empey, tell me your story.
Yeah. So the part that I really want to focus on sharing today is much more the part from when I really went to college and really moving forward and what that kind of looked like. So I'll give you a little bit of background and then we'll kind of dive into my later years and what that looked like. So when I was young, I knew something, I was unique. I knew something was different, didn't have a label. I was friends with everyone, and in some of that ways, it felt like I was friends with no one. And I definitely had some crushes growing up on women, pretended to have crushes on boys. And I grew up in a very conservative, teeny tiny town, like I said, on that orchard. But what that did is I didn't have a lot of models for what it meant to be gay or even lesbians. The only lesbians I knew in my town were really not that great. So I was really afraid of my sexuality. So because of that fear, I really leaned in a lot to my religion and my upbringing. And I would say if you looked at me as like a 16-year-old, I was like the epitome of what you would call a perfect Mormon, or at least I thought I was, right? I probably was not.
All right. So for people who don't know what that means, because both you and I have been raised in church world, but different church worlds. What does a perfect Mormon look like?
Yeah, so I really lived by like the letter of the law. So, I didn't swear. I didn't have a boyfriend. I didn't kiss anyone. I was very, like I showed up to all my activities. If I got a calling, which in my religious faith tradition, you do get callings to participate in your church community at a very young age. So if I had a calling, I did it 150%. And I kind of had a perspective like if I had more faith, then maybe I wouldn't be different. And that really influenced where I chose to go to school at BYU. Also, that's really what I could afford because there is a lower rated scholarship for people who are of that faith tradition to go to that school. Right. So that was my choice to get out of where I grew up.
And Brigham Young is a Mormon school. It's a Mormon college located in Utah. So
yeah,
go to BYU.
Yeah, so what it looks like is I had like my first kind of crush in high school, and then my senior year, and then a week after I graduated from high school, I ended up going to college. So I started summer term as a freshman just because my grades were a little bit lower, and farm town, all those dynamics played into me to be able to get into it's a very hard to get in school. So I felt very blessed and very lucky. So I went to that school, and man, it was a lot, but it was eye-opening because it still felt like I was getting out of my little teeny tiny bubble. But looking back, it's like moving from one bubble to another bubble. And so while I was there, I really leaned into the ideology that if I was perfect and I did all the things that God asked me to do, he would take away the fact that I was gay. And I didn't ever say the word gay or lesbian until I was in my late 20s. So after I graduated. So while I was at college, had my first kiss with a woman, had all sorts of experiences. I even dated many men, even kissed many men. And it just was not, I was having a really hard time. And so my senior, well, it was like, I think it was more like my junior year, I ended up coming out to my bishop, and I just said, hey, I believe that I have same-sex attraction. And inside of that, I was kind of instructed to stay away from females, not build close relationships. If I was building an attraction, I had to cut off my relationship with them. And what this also looked like is I moved every 6 months in college, because that first woman I kissed, she broke my heart.
Yeah.
It was a lot. And also
That
I had to
means
do it all
you're
in the
a
closet,
lesbian now.
because if I found out, yeah, I'm definitely a lesbian. And if that college would have found out, they would have kicked me out of that school. I would have lost a lot, and I would get excommunicated from that faith tradition. So there's a lot of pressure to stay in the closet.
So I have a question for you. You said it was a lot. What do you mean by that? What was a lot?
Well, what was a lot was like all the time I lived in fear, if I embraced who I really was, that I would get rejected, that I would be, I would lose everything that was important to me. And, so much of my faith, I felt like I had to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I also felt like if I didn't live up to the expectations of living a straight life, I'd lose my family. And inside my spiritual beliefs, there's also this perspective of, if you don't do the things you need to do, and you don't be the way you need to be to get to heaven, then you actually don't get to be in heaven with your family. And that was a lot of pressure. I mean, I love my family. They're so important to me. Even now to this day, they are so important to me. And so it was just, I had to spend a lot of time thinking about, what am I going to do about this? And that's why I think for so long I got obsessed with, reading my scriptures, read my scriptures like 30 minutes a day, every single day. I had over 400 scriptures memorized. I also have all the hymns from that faith tradition memorized, and the songs that I sang as a child memorized. And, like any temptation, I had a way to get myself off of it, so I wouldn't go let myself down that trail.
Sounds like an
But
enormous amount of pressure for what, 18, 19-year-old? I mean,
yeah,
you were
18
a
to
baby.
20.
You were
Yeah.
a baby. What
I
pressure
mean,
for you?
yeah, also my brain wasn't even fully developed. And I did going to counseling, and the counselor, when I first went, kind of scared me, because she said, well, you choose. Do you want to embrace this part of you, or do you want to be straight? I'll let you choose. And that freaked me out, because to me at that point, I didn't even think that accepting this part of me was an option, because I thought for a lot of my life, and not to be dark here, but I thought it was better to be dead than to accept this part of myself.
So when you went to see that counselor, was that a Christian counselor, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a counselor there at BYU.
Okay.
So, but because of that, that was going to be that's like late, like 2009, 2010. So they're just starting to shift the conversation in that faith around, what does it mean to like love yourself and love gay people, or tolerate them, as long as you don't act on it, right? You can be gay in that faith tradition as long as you don't act on it. But the second you take an action is really when a lot of things, you're not welcome there anymore. There's all sorts of impacts around that. And my family, I was very afraid of losing them, and that drove so much of what I did. And at that point where I told that bishop that I had same-sex attraction, is really interesting, because that, I would say that conversation is what I call my tipping point conversation for me to get on a path that I actually feel like was a path God wanted me to go on. Because at that point I was set and primed to go on a mission, to go and share my religious faith with other people around the world. Right. And because I admitted that I was not I did not end up going on a mission.
We're not sending her anywhere.
No, nope. She'll kiss all her companions. I'm kidding.
Yes.
They probably were not thinking that.
She'll fall in love with her roommate.
Right. The same fear I had for all the same years, right?
You said something really interesting, and I'm just curious about this because I know about the Mormon faith, but not super well. You said something about you tried to be perfect so you wouldn't be gay. So can you say more about that? Because I have a million questions about that.
Yeah. So I think in some of the doctrine in how I was raised was really like, if you're a worthy enough person, or if you're a holy enough person, God will take the pain away, or he'll make it right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my whole life, I kind of prayed like, hey, make me different. Make me different. I really remember from like age 12 on, for a long time, I asked God to make me different. And because I thought that if I had enough faith, or if I could prove my worthiness, or if I was a good enough servant and serving and being committed and all those things, that he would just take it away. Or if I prayed enough, or if I fasted enough. The longest time I ever fasted straight, I believe, was 5 days straight. Mm-hmm. And what was I fasting for? That was for him to not make me gay. And I only had water for those 5 days. But you know what's really crazy, what I really got from that, that was right after all the stuff with the bishop happened. And at the end, I was sitting there, I'm like, why won't you just take it away? And I finally got an answer, or what I feel like was an answer. And he said, I'm not going to take it away, so you better stop asking. And that changed everything for me. So I said, okay, so what am I supposed to do instead? And he said, no, that's the right question. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like I got put on a totally different path. I ended up running into Caitlin. We knew each other when we were teenagers, and we ran into each other as adults. And we started building our friendship. And then we fell in love. We were friends for the 6 solid months, and then we kissed. She actually asked what would happen if we kissed. And then we dove in, and I still had a year at BYU left. So had a lot.
And so how old were you?
So at that point I was, that was 10 years ago. So I was 21 at that point.
All right. So you had a year to go at at BYU. You're in love with this girl. So then what happens?
Yeah. So then, we were really back and forth on figuring it out. And then she ended up moving to Washington. I still had not to Washington. She ended up moving to Utah. I still had about a semester left of school. So she came, that was all under wraps. And really, there's all sorts of things that are challenging about navigating that, right? Like, who do we tell? Who can actually tell we're together? How do you have those conversations? So there's a ton of stress and pressure that time, really worried about, am I going to get kicked out of school? I just got to finish, got to get my degree. If I can get that degree, they can't take it away from me.
So if they found out about you and Caitlin, could you get kicked out of school?
Yeah, we would. I definitely would get kicked out of school.
Did she go there too?
She did not. So I know her from where I grew up in Eastern Washington. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Was her family Mormon as well?
Her family was raised non-denominational Christian.
Okay.
So she also has some of these same kind of challenges. And I think actually it's something that really bonded us, because we've had to figure out how to navigate it, plus how to navigate our relationship while it's majorly under wraps. So it wasn't until 4 years later that I ended up telling my family, because there was a lot that I had to process from, and also we took our time. We really took our time in building our relationship, because we knew we loved each other, but we had no clue how it would work out. And we had so much pressure, and to be, it was a slow changing of my beliefs. Because for a long time I thought, man, there's got to be a way to figure out how to be Mormon and gay. There has to be a way. And if there is a way, I'm going to find it. Because I believed in that so much. And to this day, I still have a lot of beliefs. I would not necessarily call myself a Mormon, but there's a lot of things that I'm not going to get rid of. And those fall much more under the lens of spirituality for me now. And it's taken a lot of time to process it. So I think for anyone who's like struggling with that, like it's okay to take your time. And it took me years, and it
Mhm.
also took Caitlin years. And we just worked on holding the space for each other. And all the time we're like, well, are we going to come out? Well, are we going to come out? Well, are we going to come out? And it was like, not yet, not yet, not yet.
So let
And
me ask
then,
you something, like a lot of young
yeah,
couples, you think you're not out, but everybody knows you're a couple. Like,
yeah,
was that true with you too? Like, did a lot of people know
I
and
would say like
just
our
not say anything?
closest, yeah, I think our closest friends did. And I know my parents definitely had a suspicion for a long time, but they also didn't like take it at face value until we told them. And
Mhm.
then Caitlin's grandmother, when she came out and told her grandmother was like, "Oh, I've known the whole time." But I would say some of the people who were closest to us were a little bit in denial. But
Mhm.
like we also had like those friends that were close to us and interacted with us on a regular basis, because we stayed living down in Utah until about a year ago. So we built a whole community where we really started to see that. And through that process, volunteered with lots of organizations, and LGBT Affirmation in particular, which is a Mormon LGBTQ organization. But what that was really like was very, very interesting to be alongside other people who are
Mhm.
going through the same thing and seeing how they dealt with it. And I moderated over, I don't know, 15 Facebook groups for them for about 3 years. And what I saw in so much of that is so much anger and bitterness and resentment and hate, both towards their faith and towards their family. And the more I saw that, the more I'm like, I don't want to do it that way. I don't want to have to lose my family on top of this.
Mhm.
Like, that would crush me, because I mean, how I was raised was that family is everything.
Mhm.
Um,
Do you think the anger at people's families though was because they had been rejected and like their families weren't talking to them and stuff like that? But that didn't happen to you or Caitlin. Like your family was still, everybody was still talking to you. I know you got some pushback here and there.
yeah, and it definitely had its ups and downs. But like when I went to come out to my parents, I actually like remember the weekend. I can tell you it was in July. When I was 25, I can tell you the date, but then they would know the date. I don't want them to remember it every year because they celebrate all those anniversaries. But when I came out to them, they weren't surprised, and then they were also very concerned for me because my mom grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s. She had lost lots of friends to AIDS and alcohol addictions and things like that. So they were really worried about me, and they were worried for my salvation. That's one of the terms that they used a lot. Not so much my dad. He just wanted to make sure I was okay and that I was happy. But my mom definitely. So it took years to process that. But yeah, my family did not disown me. And
So, so
I'm
what do you,
lucky.
for people who are not churched, what do you mean by salvation?
Yeah, salvation is like making it to the highest level of heaven.
So
So,
your mom was really worried because you were gay that you weren't going to be basically saved.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
And like concerned, like, are you gonna be what you need to be so that God can bless you the most?
Mhm.
Um, and being gay 100% stops that. There's also a bunch of, I'm gonna say, rituals that you participate in. But if you're gay, you are not allowed to participate in those rituals. Or if you're actively in a relationship with someone or married, you do not get to participate in those rituals because it goes against the commandments. So
Mhm.
it's a lot, and
So
there's a lot of stigma and
what do you feel
all
about
sorts of
that
stuff.
now? Like when you like so I know Anna through business and she's an ethical, kind, loving human being. So when you hear that you can't participate in a ritual because you're gay, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you kind of like where it started and where
Okay.
it got to a
Mhm.
little bit, just because I usually don't talk about this part of my experience very much,
Mhm.
and I wish more people would. So where it really started was I thought that they were very justified,
Okay.
um, because God is God, and this church represents God and God's thoughts, and so they're justified. And I just thought, again, going back to, yeah, if I'm humble enough, then maybe God will change the church. And then it kind of switched to, well, if I lean in and sort this out and try and carve a path for being gay and Mormon, maybe I can change the church from the inside out, based off the principle of love one another as you love me.
But I always argue that it's love God, love your neighbor, love yourself, and the hardest part is what's the hardest part to do?
Yeah, loving
Loving
yourself.
yourself.
Exactly. So it was very hard for me. And then so I was still going to church even after I came out to my family for a little while,
Trying to change things from the inside.
trying to change things from the inside, and really doing lots of volunteer work and working with that organization to also work to shift things culturally and theologically.
So what happened to you? Like, you went to church every day, it's Sunday, you're going to church. How were people to you? I mean, you were clearly out, you were clearly a leader in the LGBTQ movement within the Mormon church. If anybody was attached to that in any way, they knew who you were. So what was the, how did people treat you on a day-to-day basis, Sunday to Sunday basis?
I would say on Sunday to Sunday, I mean, most people were really friendly. At that point, I also that's when I started wearing suits to church, which I wore dresses to church until I was 21. And then when I stopped going to church is when I stopped wearing dresses, and I'll never wear a dress again. Nothing wrong with them. I just don't feel comfortable in them.
Not for you.
So it was very obvious for people that I was gay and that I was there. And most people were pretty generous. But then there's some things that ended up happening where I had to choose between whether I was going to stay or leave, because the bishop found out I was living with my girlfriend, and they have a disciplinary council they put you through, and then they determine if you get excommunicated. Now, I don't know any of those men, and so that's when I really started to get angry. There's also some other things that shifted if you're related with Mormon timeline around homosexuality and being gay and how they deal with that conversation. There's something that we call the exclusion policy. So they came out with a policy that said that gay members cannot participate in the church. And if you're gay, it pretty much determined that you get excommunicated if you were in an active relationship. The part that also was very crushing was that if you had children, they had to denounce their parents in order to stay in that faith tradition, in that religion. And there's all sorts of effects from that. I mean, I lost a lot of people. And that was in 2015. I lost a lot of friends because I could not deal with the pressure of how to handle that. Like you can only be rejected so many times.
Yeah.
And this is where I really started to get angry. And I was angry for a little while. And I wasn't angry at my family because they had compassion. They were actually Christ-like. And they were concerned about me. They wanted me to be alive. And at that point, we got to a point where they're like, Anna, it's more important that you stay alive than you have this worked out. And that was rough. And I think the point that really came to my face was when I lost one of my best friends right after Caitlin and I got married. And she was like in the trenches, helping people left and right. And it's really emotional for me because I never thought that I'd have to prepare myself to deal with the after effect of losing like 30 friends in just a period of like 2 months.
So you're talking about they completed suicide?
Yeah, they took their lives. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. When you first started talking about it, I thought you meant they left the church, and I didn't realize it was because they completed suicide. I am so sorry.
Yeah, and that was the moment that really changed how I felt towards my religion. Yeah. And it really made me do a long reflection in the mirror. And actually, like when the news first came out, I ended up calling my brother-in-law because I didn't believe that it was real. And he picked up the phone, and I just have to say, I am so thankful for him. He was a bishop at the time, and he completely exemplified what it's like to bear one another's burdens and to listen and not judge. And he took the time, and I mean, we had tons of conversations and I don't know how I would have processed it without the support my family, and at the same time I also had to help them kind of process it.
Mhm.
And I think this is part of the reason why it took me and Caitlin so long to end up getting married, because we had to process
You had
in
a
just
lot of
a really short amount of time. And
stuff that you were both going through.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I also knew that if I was going to marry her, I needed to not be part of a religion that was set out to tell us how wrong our lives were and our love was. And
And your
so,
eventual children are, and
yeah,
you don't want your
yeah,
eventual children to be denouncing you or have like what
yeah,
you
exactly,
you just take a
exactly.
step back and go like that's it's so crazy. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's mind
it's like
boggling.
it's just like how could you expect that from any human being?
Yep.
And like you said, does it exemplify what Jesus taught? And absolutely, positively not at all. You know, it doesn't teach what Jesus taught.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, it doesn't. And that's the biggest beef. And really, when you come down to it, actually, I'll show you my tattoo. So I have a tattoo here, and this right here has like my core belief system that are not going to leave me. And it really came down to, so after going through that, I really had to take a close look at what do I actually believe, what am I actually committed to, and if I'm going to stay alive here, what's my say about what I'm dealing with. And the thing that really changed for me around how to not stay stuck in the anger was to have the time and the space, and then to choose to have a say and to really recognize that what I have to say about my life and who I am, that is up to me. It's not up to anyone else. My say about who I am matters more than anyone's opinion, more than anybody else, no matter what. And where I really started to lean into was, I remember this one night. I mean, it was in December. It was after I'd lost a lot of people, and I said, "God, do you even care anymore?"
Mhm,
And I just sat there and I wondered,
mhm.
and it got really clear to me. Yeah, I care, and I'm angry with you. And that's the moment that I really realized that my relationship with God or the universe or that higher power, who they are, that matters more than anything. No one else determines my relationship with them, because that's personal. And I
Well,
realized,
it's almost we're taping this on June 1st. It's almost like when people name their sexual orientation or their gender identity, the only person who can name that is you. You know,
exactly.
and your faith and whether you want to be within a faith tradition or whether you want to have a more personal faith that is based on what you believe, or if you want to eschew religion entirely and just have a more spiritual belief system, that's okay. And
Yeah,
also too, you can also, this always drives me crazy, but you can be a religious person and a spiritual person at the same
exactly.
time. Now you can't be you can, yeah, because a lot of people think that people who are belong into religious spirit in religious systems aren't spiritual people. They're religious, and no, that's not true. Sometimes
Yeah,
people
to
can be,
me,
yeah,
it's
you know,
very individual, right? It's just
right.
based on who you are. And that's what the first line on my arm represents. That
Mm-hmm,
the universe has my back
mm-hmm,
and loves me bigger than I can imagine. And
mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I ended up putting it on my arm just like a couple years ago because I wanted to remember, but I really got clear. And that's where I really started to lean into, like, okay, if I can understand and love and accept myself, um, then I can shift the way that people see this. And I'm going to do it the way that Christ would, which really was the way where you slap my cheek and he turned the other cheek.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not to say I don't have boundaries. It's not to say I don't call my family out. You can ask them. I definitely call them out on stuff that doesn't work. But I do it in a way where, yeah, for years, and I don't, this is just a way I chose to do it. So you can do it any way that you want to. But I chose to walk with my family and let them walk with me. So when I was dealing with things that were in pain, I didn't hide it from them, no matter what they had to say. And sometimes I still had to say, Mom, I cannot talk about this. I have to end the conversation. And I will tell you, I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours on the phone with my mom. And I don't think we could have done it in person. because we have more respect to listen and hear each other out. And when we got triggered, we'd say, okay, we got to put this on the shelf, and I love you. And we got very committed to building a relationship that was based on loving and accepting each other, because no one is perfect. No one. And if we look at those beliefs, I really just leaned into, well, how can I help them get where I'm at, even though I don't necessarily believe all those things, not anymore, or not in the same ways. So how can I help them so that we can create a space where we just love each other, and that can be the focus. So I'd say, yeah, for like the last 7 years, that has been my focus. How can I show up being a person who's loving, and also allows my family to have the freedom to believe what they believe. And also, when they want to talk about those things and I don't, I tell them I don't want to talk about it, and I walk away. And they can do the same thing to me, and I don't get
Do they
offended or
respect
upset.
that? Do they respect that when you say, I'm not talking about that right now?
Yeah,
And has anything changed? Like, have you seen the needle move at all?
yeah. I mean, a lot has changed. I mean, because we give each other the freedom to not have to force our beliefs to be exactly the same. It's not based on agreement. It's based on loving and understanding and listening. Um, and because of that, yeah, a lot of things have changed. I've seen my parents become more progressive.
Mhm.
Caitlin feels like she's got a great connection with my family. Like, she feels like she's part of the family. Like, her and my dad have a relationship, and her and my mom have a relationship, and those are independent of me. And she has relationships and friendships with my siblings, and and I'm also building relationships with her family. Like, all of those things have really started to shift, because at the end of the day, we choose to be committed to, we try and give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but again, also saying, like, yeah, that does not work. And we also came from the principle, like, we also need to be respectful in order to gain respect.
Mhm.
And yeah, sure, maybe there's ways we could have done this better, but again, I think because of how much anger and resentment, which was justified, I'm not saying it's not justified, it just was not the way that I wanted to go and do. And I think there's probably a period of about 2 years where I was at a point where I'm like, man, I'm just going to disown my family. They didn't disown me, so I'm going to just disown them. And then I never have to deal with this, because it's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, to
Mhm.
process your own spirituality and then help them process their religious beliefs. And then we started to learn and discover about cognitive dissonance together, and
Mhm.
giving ourselves permission to not have beliefs that fit together. And because we started to lean into that together, we got all the space in the world for each other. And I mean, it's it's pretty amazing, and there's still work to do, but just like any relationship, there's always work to do to build a relationship.
So let's have you talk to now somebody who is the same way like you are, who wants a relationship with their family. They don't see eye to eye, they don't agree. They're not angry, they're more sad more than anything else. What advice would you give them, and how do you move forward? And I gotta ask, and I want to ask another question. When do you call it quits?
Yeah. I mean,
Because there are families that are toxic and cruel. So
yeah,
what is your advice about that? So
yeah.
well, how do you like start to have the conversation? How do you live into that? And I heard you say about with your relationship with your mom, and you guys would like take time off from, but you have to have your partner on the other side has to be willing to do the same thing. So what would your advice be for people who are trying to have a relationship with a family they may not necessarily agree with?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would look at is your family willing to step out of agreement? You know, or are they only willing, or you only can have a relationship if you agree with each other and you live a specific way? If
Mhm.
the answer is they're not willing to step outside of that kind of a relationship, then I will say I don't know how well that would go. Not saying you have to give up, but also if it's not healthy for you anymore and you are burned out and you don't feel like anyone loves you and you don't have that support, go start building support from other people.
Or
Because
you can do
my
both at
friend
once.
family, yeah, you can do both at once. And I will say my friend family, and I call them my friend family because they are like my family. They were there for me. I even have people who are like my aunts and my uncles who were there for me when my own family could not be.
Mhm.
And I love those people dearly. And I mean, just thinking about who they were and who they are for me, they're still there for me to this day. And it took a long time for my family, so I didn't rush it. I let him I let it just take time. And if it wasn't working, I'd take a time out. You know,
Mhm.
great, cool. There's probably a period where I didn't talk to my mom for a couple months at
Mhm.
all about anything.
Mhm.
I just let it be.
So
And
did
then
you go ahead?
yeah, and then also to like how to know and where to start as I really started owning like, hey, I love you. I actually care about you a whole hell of a lot and I don't know what to do. And that's like a super vulnerable place to come from. But once my family got that I love you and I don't want to walk away from you and I could, that's what I'm trying to choose between right now. If I should stay in your life or not. And I love you and I would rather stay in your life. Can we work this out? Are you willing to? Because I'm willing to do the work. Are you willing to with me? And that it's a really bold conversation to have. And I definitely recommend make sure you got a community and your partner behind you.
Yeah, because
Because
you could get rejected and it could be incredibly painful. Mhm.
yeah. And I would say I mean,
Don't
it
make it
was
unless you've put some foundation
some
down.
thought in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I really for sure thought my family would say, cool, just walk away. I mean, again, and this was after I already came out to them, you know? So that really,
So there was something about your family that you missed apparently, but you thought they were going to tell you to just, hit the road, Jack, and they didn't say that.
yeah, I think it's always been really hard for me to see how much they love me.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been hard for me to see how much anyone loves me. Because I've kind of had it in my head like, and I do think this is because of mostly my religious upbringing and knowing that I was unique. And I mean, really, like age 6, I knew I was unique. Like I said, didn't have the words, but I was really convinced that God didn't love me. So how could
But how do
anyone
you
love me?
reconcile that, Anna? If God creates anything, everything, weren't you created by God?
Yeah, but
So
I
how do
was
you
a horrible monster. I was a
no, but
horrible monster.
no, but
That's
you were
really
But you were created by God perfectly in God's image. I don't gender God like Anna. So she's he
like
and it all over the place, but I don't. But like how can you I'm just this theological discussion. How can you justify a loving God if a God is going to reject you because of how you're created to be?
right, but I think it really came down to the fact that I was gay, and it has to do with the way that those conversations happened long before I was born. So it was woven into me from a young age that
It was
marriage was
woven into the
between,
fabric.
yeah, yeah, of my identity, of I mean, my whole upbringing. I mean, my parents are they're, my dad is the second generation LDS, and my mom is, I mean, a long line back. I mean, I think even on my dad's side, we have a long line back. I mean, people who crossed the plains in the 1700s as part of this faith tradition. So they've been part of it. Yeah, it's young, but they've been part of it for the whole 200 years. So it was woven into the way the conversations were. And I don't think it was just my parents. It was the way I was taught at church by that community is also just by the doctrines and then the way the doctrines were applied in the conversations, right? Like,
Well, right. I mean, when you're a little kid and you're 6 years old and you're sitting in a pew and they're having conversations around stuff like that. And then all of a sudden you have this aha moment and you're like, oh my God, they're talking about me.
yeah, and I don't fit here. Clearly, I don't fit.
Clearly I
So,
don't fit. And who am I
uh-huh.
going to talk to about this?
Yeah, so I kept it a lot to myself. The other thing too, I would say is that like because of some of the ways that the culture is applied from the doctrines
Hmm.
in that faith tradition, there definitely is like this worthiness. Am I worthy of God's love? Particularly because I would say in more traditional Christian theology, um, God loves and it's not conditional. Now, when you look at some of the doctrines here and the culture here, yeah, there's a lot more conditions,
Well, any
a lot more.
fundamentalist Christian, any fundamentalist, Pentecostal, Roman Catholicism, any of those faith traditions tend to be very, very, God's love is very conditional.
Yeah,
More
yeah, and
progressive traditions don't believe that,
yeah, and I would say this is much more that foundational,
Yeah.
traditional, and fundamental traditional. So it's also just the thing is that they never ever said like God's love is conditional, but there's all sorts of things that were kind of, like I said, just kind of woven in, and I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever be good enough. I don't know if I'm worthy. I don't know if I belong. And I did not know those things really confidently until I was a late teenager, and until I was there in college. That's really when I knew that God cared about me and
Mm-hmm.
knew who I was,
Mm-hmm.
just because I had the question so much in my mind. So, and yeah, I do believe it. But it took a long time. Like, it was really clear for me to understand God loves everyone, but I don't know about me, and that was just how it was for a long time. And I mean, that was the question I asked all the time.
Well, and that gets back to, loving God, loving your neighbor, and loving yourself. The hardest thing to do is clearly loving yourself. People
Yeah.
struggle with that very much. So I just have a quick question of curiosity. In the LDS Church, um, you were not only gay, but you were a girl. So, I mean, what type of baggage did you have being just female in the church?
Yeah, I think there definitely is like very specific gender roles
Mm-hmm.
that you're supposed to play. Um, Wives are supposed to be a very specific way.
Are they
Even
supposed to be
husbands are
submissive?
supposed to, not necessarily submissive, but they are supposed to partner with your husbands, and your husband is the authority. Now, but
That's a
it's all,
compliment. Yeah, it's called a
yeah. So
complementary marriage. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it was just also, I mean, at BYU, I had very long hair. So actually, I should send you a picture so you
I've
can
seen that
throw
picture.
it in the
You've
video.
shown me.
Yeah. So I
It's
have
very
super
fab
long
there.
hair, and I made sure that I fit in, because with short hair, people wondered. And there's a lot of cultural things. When you look doctrinally, there's definitely some there, and I'm not an expert in that, and actually haven't like gone down the rabbit hole of that. I feel like going down the rabbit hole for my sexuality was so
Enough.
much that I definitely am like, I'm just gonna leave that one be, and it's fine. But I do know it's there, and I do know lots of people who are heavily impacted by those challenges that come in the way that doctrine is applied and the way that culturally it represents. But yes, like there's a very specific way you are supposed to be. And I mean, I've got all sorts of skills that people are surprised. I'm super crafty. I'm great at, like serving other people. I was trained to be of service to others, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Well,
And I was,
it's not a bad thing as long as you don't lose yourself within it.
yeah. And as long as I say no when I need to say no, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
I shouldn't say yes all the time. That doesn't work for me to just, here we go.
Yeah, because if you
So,
say yes all the time, you just become resentful.
yeah.
And you
Yeah.
get pissed off at people, even
Yeah.
sometimes people you actually want to help because you're just tired or you don't feel like doing it today.
Right. And then you start to resent yourself because you crossed your own boundaries
Mm-hmm.
when you should have said no. And I will say that's one thing that I see that um, is not, that's something I had to learn. And I know we all have to learn that. But I feel like when you come from a faith tradition that is not necessarily set up for you to see all those things or even have an affirming space, it's a lot harder to know what the boundaries are. And I think that's also partially what took so long for me to know, where do I want to stand and where do I want to be.
Well, yes, and if your goodness and your salvation is wrapped up into being a certain way and doing life a certain way, like women are expected to do, then you're not a good and faithful servant if you don't follow the prescriptions of the patriarchy.
Yeah,
What it
and
is
I'll tell
like.
you, like, yeah, from like age 12 until 18, this is kind of what I was taught to do. Yeah, you're gonna go to Young Women's, and you're gonna get your Young Women medallion, which is where it's kind of like the
Purity.
LDS version for Boy Scouts, but it's
Right.
doing more homemaker things and serving other people and crafty things like canning and making quilts and sewing. And I suck at sewing. Don't ask me to sew you anything. But yeah, so yeah, go to Young Women's, get your Young Women medallion, graduate from high school, go to college, BYU if possible, get married. And that was kind of like,
That
hey,
was
I got my checklist. Woo! And then really, I also had to confront like, oh crap, well, I'm not getting married. And what do I do? Well, they didn't teach me that my degree is for me to have a career. So that like changed everything. And I ended up getting a brain injury at the end of my time at school. So I actually was going to go to become a pediatrician. That was one of my goals, just because I love kids. And I was also in a point where, this is before I ran into Caitlin and before we fell in love, I was like, well, if I can't be married, then I'll stay single and celibate and I'll be a doctor. That would be a life's goal worth pursuing. So maybe I'll pursue that. And then I got a brain injury, and then I shifted gears and went back to public relations and marketing and focusing on making a difference in businesses and nonprofits and things like that. So that's like how that shifted. But then I'm like, oh, great. Well, I do definitely need to take care of myself. And then I fell in love with Caitlin, and I'm like, hey, we got to create something where I can take care of myself and her. And yeah, of course, we still want to have kids. So how do we create something that really is that career?
Do you ever step back now that you're, 10 years beyond this and say, that's ridiculous that I was asking myself to be single my entire life?
100%.
Because you are so family oriented. I can't imagine you not being married and having a family.
Me either. And actually, I think like,
and I understand why you were going to be a pediatrician, because you're like, I'll have kids around at least.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I think the greatest shift for me was when I started asking God, what should I do?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want me to do about it? And that's when I really started to lean into like accepting myself and just continuing to ask, okay, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? Kissing Caitlin, yeah, that was a whole 2-week conversation before I ever kissed her. And then what's crazy is when I kissed her, I knew that I would marry her, and that scared the crap out of me. But I still felt like, and I still feel like to this day, and maybe it's not true, but it's just really where I, when I go searching and looking, this is really what resonates with me. I felt like it was her or no one. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily because I was going to stay in that religion, but she is like my other half. It's not that she completes me, because we are two complete individuals, but we are more complete when we are with each other. Mm-hmm. We get to complete what we came here to do together because we are together. And then really just leaning into that, it's been amazing, because we just continue, like when we got married, it was all just continuing to stay on the path that we chose, and also like checking in, like, yeah, is this the right choice? Feel like it's the right thing. Yep, it is the right thing. Okay, let's do it.
Are you in any faith tradition now, the two of you? Do you go to church?
We don't go to church. Yeah, we don't go to church. We are pretty spiritual. Mm-hmm. We meditate. We also talk, and we don't necessarily pray together, but mm-hmm. when we're really stressed out, I do know we go have the conversations with God.
My partner and I pray together when I'm really it's funny because I'm the one that's the minister, but I think some of us are always ministers, whether we have a special designation or not. But she's actually quite a good prayer, and she prays differently than I am, because she genders God, but she's very good at it, and it's very, very like when I'm really super anxious and I say, will you pray for me? She can do it. And it's really actually lovely, you know? And so
Yeah.
it's a way to be intimate in a way. It's just another way to be intimate with your partner. Because I was married to a man before, like many, I would never have done that with him. But I
Right.
do pray with her because it's also important to her. So, you know, it's something that she um, enjoys. And we joke, she always says, I'm more conservative than you are. And I'm like, yep, you are. But, you know, she's also somebody like yourself that, you know, um, she came out young, she came out at 18, and, you know, her first lover was her prayer partner from the Baptist Student Unions. It's,
I
you know,
love
those
that.
bishops know something. So
That's awesome.
so let me ask you something. When you guys have your family, do you think you'll return to a church tradition, or do you think, because I mean, it sounds like both you and Caitlin have a belief in God. I'm assuming Caitlin does. She may not, because I know couples believe all kinds of different things, but you still have a real deep faith in God. At least you do. What do you
Mhm.
think going forward in your lives? Do you guys, like for me,
Yeah, I
when
think
when I had my oldest child, that's when I went back to church, because I wanted my kids to have some grounding in a faith tradition, and also to have a community of people around them that weren't relatives. You
mhm.
know?
Yeah, totally. So I think, like when I look, I think, I mean, yeah, so Caitlin does really have a strong belief in God as
Mhm.
well. And also really just looking and leaning into our intuition and knowing and really just trusting ourselves and trusting each other and even looking for the what's so. Um, and around our children, I mean, I know we both really want to raise our children to be kind and come from the core perspective, treat other people how you want to be treated. I mean, if the whole world lived that one principle 2% better, I
The
have no
world.
clue what the world would look like. So I know we're really going to come from that perspective. And I also know that we're going to let them be in the discovery of their own beliefs, right? Like we've got crystals around our house. We also, I mean, you will catch us praying. They're gonna know. But I don't think,
Can I
we're
ask
gonna
you?
be like, hey, we're gonna sit down and read scriptures together,
Do you have a? I don't. So I don't know in your faith tradition, but do you put a manger up at Christmas time?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
they'll be like, moms, what is this guy?
Mhm.
What's this dude
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. And really want to leave it open for them to really like discover. And I also, I have no clue exactly what that looks like. At this point, I've got a lot of friends in the Mormon tradition are like, well, if the Mormon church changed these few things, I would go back. But I will say after everything that happened, I don't think I could ever go back.
Mhm.
Um,
You've
with the
just grown
people,
around it.
yeah, and with the people that I lost, there's um no amount of apologies that will bring them back. And that's kind of where my boundary is. Now we might find another church, but I have no clue at this point. I know with where Caitlin's at, she's not necessarily wanting to go to a church, but our
Mhm.
goal is really to build a community of people and still help our children have a tribe, right? Like it takes a village, and I know that particularly from my teeny tiny town, like that whole community out there raised me.
Well, yeah,
So
and it does take a village, and it doesn't have to be a religious village, and it doesn't have to be a faith tradition village. It
mhm.
truly doesn't, you know, just people that care and teach our kids how to be kind, loving, um, compassionate, empathetic people.
Yeah,
That's what we need. So,
yeah, yeah, and I
well, this
think
story
it's
was really interesting, Anna. Thank you.
yeah, and thanks for letting me share more about like what that experience was like and with my family, and to like make it really clear, it definitely took something,
Yeah.
like, and I had to weigh, like, am I willing to do what it takes so that I can have it with my family? And that's still a practice. I will probably have to practice it the rest of my life with them.
Do you think the Holy Spirit had anything to do with that?
I mean, I definitely think God and the Holy Spirit definitely influenced my family. And I mean, I just pray that their lives are touched so their hearts can be softened on a
Do you
regular
ever,
basis.
do you ever think that perhaps the Holy Spirit is working with you in the sense that giving you enough grace to sit there and listen when you probably sometimes want to get up and walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, like if it's like the third time we've had the conversation,
You're like, okay.
I say, we've talked about this already, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. We don't need to beat a dead horse. And that's when I do get up and walk away. And yes, I do feel like I have to have patience and grace, and that includes for myself. And like I said, I think that's why it's a practice, and also like really leaning in and trusting that the universe and God will have my back. If
Well,
this is what's best, they're gonna have my back.
and also beyond that, it's also in the psychological realm of having good boundaries, knowing when you can sit there and talk about something that makes you uncomfortable, but also knowing when you have to get up because you just don't have the bandwidth today. And I know, that's really important to do, to take
Yeah.
care of ourselves in those
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah. And I would say too that the most difficult conversations, I actually still don't necessarily have them in person. I have them over the phone because there's something different about the way that we listen over the phone. And maybe it's because I lived 700 miles away from my family, but it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier for me to get over the times where we felt like hanging up on each other. And we never ever did hang up on each other. Instead, we'd say, I can't have this conversation and I need to go and I love you. And then we would hang up.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're in person, it's a lot easier for someone to just walk away. And that to me, that's also not necessarily healthy conflict or healthy communication. I mean, you may need to, but it's very important you say,
Well,
I don't like this conversation, put the boundary and then walk away. That's just what I saw.
Yeah, I'm probably much better in person because on the phone, I will hang up on somebody if they piss me off enough, but I am able to sit there with somebody when they're angry with me and be okay. And I'm also able to stand up to things a lot more too, but my anger, if you get me in a place, if I get into a place where I'm really pissed off, I will hang up the phone. And that's never good because that just makes everybody all angry at each other.
Right. And I think the other thing too, the other key piece is really just reminding myself that even when they say shitty things, they're saying it because they love me. They're saying it because they care. And that's the lens that I had to look through, even when, like they said a lot of hard things. Now, that may not be the case for your family. They may not be saying it to you because they love you, but that's the lens I chose to take on, whether it was true or not. Their intention was to love me. So getting really clear, what is your intention? Do you even want to have a relationship with me? That changed everything because they wanted to have it back with me, which means, okay, great. So if we're going to have one, we're going to do it from the context of loving each other, which means I'll hold the space and I need you to hold it too. And I'm going to come from the benefit of the doubt that we love each other. And that may not be the case sometimes, but here we go. And I'll say no when I need to say no, and that changed everything with my family.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking about people who have been indoctrinated with these values from the time they're very young, but have never had a challenge to it, in the Mormon community, yes, it may be being gay. Sometimes infertility in some conservative communities can be a really bad thing. If you're a woman and you can't have a baby, that can be and so that you get shunned over those things and stuff like that. And so I think that sometimes people that have to really, really struggle with their faith, like the people that I just mentioned, they often have a really active faith because they've had to really wrestle with things that they have been taught. And I wanted to say something that, Anna alluded to, is that it is really normal when you're first coming out to have a shaking of the foundations of your faith. And lots of people have it. Sometimes people go towards atheism or agnosticism, and that's okay. You can take the space in your faith journey and you can come back to it if you decide to, or if maybe you decide, no, I can't do it anymore, that's okay too. But we're, like Anna said in the beginning of this, she said that we're each entitled to our own decision about what our faith tradition and what we're going to believe in. And that's really important. We each get that right to decide.
Yeah, no one else has answers. And I think the more people I talk to about their journey around this, the more I wanted the answers, and then the more I realized actually it's better that I find the answers for myself. And that actually has helped me lean into trusting myself more, and it actually has strengthened my spirituality and my connection to God, because I gave myself the permission to seek out what was true for me without the need to force other people to believe the exact same thing, which is very different than how I was
Yeah.
raised.
Well, and also too that there's something, denominations in sects of Christianity or any faith that tell you that they have all the answers. That's really not true. And I think what Anna has talked about and we were talking about today is about living in the gray and also living in the mystery, because life is a lot more fun if there's some mystery to it and not like, oh, this happened because your brain did this and your brain, it's nice to have mystery around things in life because it makes it special. It does.
Yep,
So
exactly.
Anna, any big books that you've read in this journey that you're like, okay, if you're really, I'm gonna actually put you on the spot here. So if you're coming out from Mormonism or a faith tradition that's super conservative, do you have any recommendations for anybody?
100%. So
Okay, go.
Carolyn Pearson, she is a woman who took care of her gay husband,
Mhm.
and he died. And she also wrote some primary songs that I grew up singing. One of them is called I'll Walk With You. Now, she has a series of books. One of them is called Circling the Wagons, and then one is called LGBTQ Hero's Journey. So those, and they're not big, but those two books made a huge, huge difference for me, because it helped me understand and look at my journey as a queer person, and as a lesbian, like, to really look at it as a spiritual path and spiritual growth, which I think shifted the way that I see spirituality now, and why I have held on to a few of those core beliefs. And she just is really loving and really generous. Some other books that made a huge difference for me was God and the Gay Christian. Even though it was not Mormon based, it helped me understand the scriptures that were getting used against me before I was born.
They're called
So I could
clever
break down the
passages.
conversation, yeah, and I could break down the dogma around that for myself. And then I'm trying to think if there's any other books. I would say, I mean, You Are a Badass helped me look at some things from a new lens. And then I also, did a lot of work with a book called Mindset, which doesn't necessarily look at being gay, but it does talk about your perspectives and the way that you frame things and look at things, which empowered me to see that I could choose the lens that I wanted to look at things. And then there's a book by Edward Casey that I was reading in anthropology in college. It's very theoretical, but it talks about the way that we as humans identify with space, time, and place. So really looking at belonging. And honestly, thank you, Professor Bonefort, for making me read that book, because it just made me look at my life in a whole new way and start to find belonging where I did not feel like I belonged.
You've got quite a reading list.
Don't have to read them all.
When you came out, did you have a coming out song?
So the song that just continues to come to mind, so is the Let Me Take You to Rio from that movie. It's by Esther Dean. That was the summer that movie came out, and that's the song that Caitlin and I, like, we just jammed to as friends. And that's really, like, when I really saw, like, how happy I could be just with having a friend, because I'd never let myself get as close to another female as I did with Caitlin. That's probably why we fell in love. And at the end of that summer, after listening to that song for 6 months, is when we kissed. So it's more like it encouraged me to come out. And coming out, I'm always singing the I'm coming out. We're always singing that song too. So we always make fun of anything that has rainbows. And I think
Yes.
that's also a sign your family's getting on board. They're starting to make gay jokes with you in a healthy way, not a bad way, a healthy way.
A healthy way. What's the best thing about your life now?
I mean, honestly, when I was 16, I really thought I was going to have to marry a man, and that horrified me. So the fact that I get to wake up to an amazing, beautiful woman defies all of my dreams every single day. Also, she makes me a better person, and she makes me so happy. Not because she makes me happy, but because when she's happy and when I'm happy, it's just we just get to have happiness together. Also, I mean, we have the kind of because we have such a good friendship too. It's like it sucks when we argue because I can't talk to my best friend about it. But I mean, I don't ever have to worry if I don't belong because every day I get to wake up and I know that I belong. I belong right here, and I will belong right here with her.
Oh, that's
So,
beautiful.
yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, Anna, thank you so much. It was nice talking about other stuff besides business. So thank you for coming on the show. And Anna's an amazing website developer, and all the stuff will be at the end of the program. So you can check her out and see what she does. And she really is very social conscious web designer and really wants to help people make better websites that reaches more people. So.
Yeah, make a big difference with your
And
business.
make a big difference in your business. She's done that for me, so check out my website. So thank you very much, Anna. It was great having you on the show today.
Thanks, Anne Marie.